Good morning, LinkedIn, and welcome to Thursdays with Culture Talk. I am Teresa Agresta, coming to you from Saratoga Springs, New York, as usual, and joining my co-partner, Cynthia Forstman, here on Thursdays with Culture Talk. And we're bringing you another in our series of the Roadmap series, where we are looking at culture and the various ways that it can make an impact in your organization. So we're calling this Roadmap series because when we look at culture through the lens of archetype, through these human storylines that we talk about every week, it doesn't sit around. It's on the road, it's moving, it doesn't get dusty sitting in a drawer or on a shelf somewhere. And there are many, many different ways to apply and activate the outcomes of the work when you are using archetype and this framework that we share at Culture Talk.
So far we've been talking about leadership, a roadmap for leadership, a roadmap for team development. Last week, we talked about purpose-driven brands and doing all of those different things through cultural archetype assessments. So this, again, is the series, the Roadmap series.
The Roadmap series, that's right. And we're driving somewhere on this tour. We are driving toward our certification program, which kicks off again in the fall for an 8-week session that starts September 6th. So if this conversation around culture and personal development and the way that those things intersect and drive tangible results in business are things that you want to hear more about and learn more about, we'd love to talk to you about that certification program. Again, it's 8 weeks long, it's just 2 hours a week. Great opportunity to learn how to apply this thinking and these tools in your consulting work, in your coaching work, and in your work with teams. If you're an in-house leader, if you're working in the L&D space.
Yeah, and just to note that on September 6th, we actually will be kicking off 2 cohorts. So no matter where you are in the world, we have cohorts that will kick off on a parallel path, but at different times of day, so that we can expand the opportunity for people to join us from different locations.
Right.
Check it out.
And if you're not ready for certification yet, but you want to put your toe in the water, join us next Tuesday. We have an invite-only event. Consider this your invite. Below the video here, we will post a link to grab an invite to join us for 2 sides of the culture equation. This is going to be an immersive, interactive, 90-minute experience where you'll get to play with these ideas in a very low commitment, environment. So we're keeping them small. And we'd love to have you join us, share your feedback, your ideas, and get your questions on the table. So 2 sides of the culture equation, Tuesday, 2 times, also at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern. So that being said, today we are focused on the merger of 2 or more cultures that are coming together most often through some kind of acquisition. We throw around this moniker of M&A, but we know that usually it's an acquisition that gets the ball rolling. And after that acquisition, the opportunity, the need to successfully merge cultures is a huge challenge. We have some stats on that, some details to share on what does that challenge, where do we land in these merger conversations oftentimes?
Yeah, because it's almost as if merging operationally is the easy part. And the tougher part is, how do you integrate cultures? And we're going to share some stats, but then we're also going to take a look at some case studies about companies that have actually used the cultural storytelling framework we use to address these post-merger cultural integrations. So first of all, I actually pulled up this morning because I wanted to see like, where is M&A activity? You know, like we know pre-pandemic, it was on the rise. It's certainly a very popular growth strategy for organizations to come together with other organizations. That kind of 1 + 1 = 3, if you will.
In theory, yeah.
Right. And so in 2021, so last year, global deal value reached $5.9 trillion. So some really big money in the M&A space. However, in 2022, the pace of M&A has cooled off a little bit, with deal value down by about 20%. I'm getting these numbers from a study by Bain and Company. And they said, you know, in many ways, you know, we've got an economy, a recession, a war, things that are happening in the world that are, you know, maybe making people who would normally come back
a little bit.
Yeah, just take a little bit more of a cautious approach. However, they said based on the first couple of months, 5 months of 2022, and now of course we're at 8 months, but in the first 5 months, they said it still could reach $4.7 trillion by the end of 2022, which would make it the second biggest deal on record, second biggest year of M&As.
Wow. So even with a 20% decline over last year, I guess under last year's numbers,
yeah,
the second largest year. So that's saying something.
Yeah, and you think about how many people have worked for organizations that have either been acquired or have been an acquirer, right? And are part of like, what is it like when two cultures come together in an M&A?
Right. We hear an awful lot about those big numbers that you talked about. Sometimes it's the number of deals, sometimes it's the value of the deals. But I think that we hear an awful lot less about the impact, sort of the human fallout of what happens,
right?
You know, when we get focused on the numbers. And I think people go into a merger with high hopes.
Right.
Yeah, big projections about what this deal is going to do for the, you know, outcomes, financial outcomes. You know, maybe there are service related goals, product, you know, whether it's consolidations or expansions of product lines. There's all kinds of conversations about those operational things, as you mentioned. But where we see mergers really suffering is in bringing the two cultures together. They shared some interesting stats, I think, as well in that article.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, yeah, so the same, so what we have, you know, you can look at a lot of different studies. So it'll say up to 80% of M&As, mergers and acquisitions, fail to live up to the potential that was hoped financially, operationally. They fail to get there. And the number one reason is this culture clash. And I'm again quoting from Bain and Company, who did a survey of executives who managed M&A in their own organizations. And they said the culture clash was the number one reason for a deal's failure to achieve promised value. And they said the company's fundamental ways of working are so different and so easily misinterpreted that people feel frustrated, they feel anxious, and it leads to a demoralization and defections. Productivity goes down, and no one seems to know how to fix it. The dreaded culture.
Yeah, dreaded culture clash, right? What I really like in there, that the phrase that the cultures are so easily misrepresented. And what I hear in that, based on our experience and our work with companies that are merging cultures and bringing cultures together, is that it's not that we assume bad things. We just literally do not know how to interpret each other. We have not got a framework or a language to open a real communication where there's actually understanding, happening, which can lead very quickly to defensiveness. We know this happens. Finger pointing, fear, a lot of fear about what does this mean for me personally, my department, my, protecting my turf, all those things.
Yeah.
Right. The walls go up. And then, once that wall is up, the increase in our, propensity to misunderstand, I think just skyrockets. So it's almost like a, self-perpetuating problem. It starts and then grows quickly.
Yeah. And I think, pre-merger, there's often a little bit in the due diligence process of lip service to culture. And so, an acquiring firm is looking at another company and they go, we like them.
Yeah. It feels right. Our gut says
they're growing something awesome that we want, and we're going to be so aligned. But how do we figure out where we're not aligned culturally?
Yeah, where's the gap?
Yeah, where is that gap? What's the difference between, company A and company B? And we can actually, in the process that we use at CultureTalk, is actually called a baseline culture audit, which is a process that takes some data that is qualitative in nature and some data that's quantitative in nature. So we actually have an organizational culture assessment that can be given to people at company A and given to people at company B that will measure different storylines, different story patterns that we call archetype, and allow us to look at what are the patterns of kind of behavior, what are the patterns that define kind of how things really work around here.
Right. Well, what we call them the unwritten rules. And I think sometimes the idea that we're going to get along really well is based on what we've documented, perhaps. And those are the documents we share. When we're playing nice and getting ready for the deal to go through. But it's those unwritten rules that are operating below the surface. They're behaviorally based, and everybody kind of knows how to behave, but maybe they haven't been discussed, talked about, brought to the surface. And so really getting that level of understanding about what's happening in a culture is what that baseline culture audit allows. And I think critically, the real juice here is not in the results of the assessment. It's in the honest conversation that happens because we have a common language and a common framework, and the ability to communicate and to really understand and to really hear one another, both within your own unit or company, department, or the company or department or unit that you are actively trying to merge with.
Yeah, because as part of the baseline culture audit, there's the assessment, but then there is the conversation around the assessment. There is the uncovering of how are these different patterns actually showing up in how we behave and how we treat each other and how we make decisions.
Yeah, and the assumptions, right? Those assumptions that we have. I'll give you a great example of this. When we were working with a firm that had acquired another firm, they were both in the architecture space. And we got to that place of uncovering origin stories. And one company, their origin was they had spilled out of a large firm distinctly for the reason their origin story was like, we do not want to do business like that. We don't want to have that, onus on us all the time to be marching to their orders and following their structure and stuck in their hierarchy. We want a lifestyle. We want the ability to make our own decisions, and we want to be able to have personal integrity. We feel like we're out of personal integrity at this large organization, so we're leaving and we're starting our own company, which they grew and had great success, became really well known, and stuck to their personal ideals in growing their company. come retirement, they were looking for a buyer, strategic buyer, so that they could move on. And the whole culture of the company was based on this innocent archetype pattern, one of the primary drivers that was based on integrity and ideals and keeping things simple. Along comes the strategic buyer, who's been typed with a hero and a ruler archetype, and does not understand the simple, keep it simple, go home at 5 o'clock commitment that this new company they're acquiring has had, and can't understand some of their regular routine decisions that they make. Just don't click with us. That doesn't make sense to me. That's not how you're successful. That's not how you run a firm. What do you mean? You'll get back to me tomorrow. It's just not in my,
not how they roll.
Not how they roll, not how they were successful.
Mm-hmm.
So literally by breaking down the origin story of the acquiring company, they were born in a recession. They were voracious business developers. They had a hero mentality. You eat what you kill. That's like some of the language, some of the stories that they told. I looked at myself in the mirror every day and I said, if we're going to survive, we've got to go hunting. You eat what you kill. Now, here are these two cultures that are both well-known, well-respected in their field.
Portfolios, right?
Right. Beautiful portfolios of work, beautiful photos that felt like they were in alignment, bringing people together that have very different cultures. And so by breaking it down and being able to share those things in the context of the framework and actually measuring to see where were they aligned, what patterns did they have in common and why,
right?
And what were those underlying unwritten rules that they marched to, that they lived, that lived experience. And
or some gaps
to go from here, right? Where are we going to go from here as a merged entity?
Yeah.
And how are we going to behave are the next things. But you can't cue that up if those walls are up, if people are suspicious, if they're feeling angry, misunderstood, misrepresented, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's such a. I remember that initiative, and I think it's like a team building experience in and of itself, because it forces. I don't want to say forces. It invites people really to say, why do I do the things? Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we behave that way?
You may not often stop and think about them. We may not be consciously aware on a regular basis.
Right.
But you're right. The process and the communication that happens around it invites that pause.
Yeah.
And it all comes out pretty quickly. I mean, and that's the beautiful part too. It just, it's there and it's pretty easy to get at.
So now we've got these gaps in our cultures. Like we've got this like different way of behaving, but once we identify where those gaps exist, now a company that is part of a merger, we can start to strategize. Well, how are we gonna address this so this isn't the needle, that's poking us all and having people get upset and unengaged or leave or whatever.
Right, absolutely. And that's where the breakdown starts to happen. Is the failure of, well, it all evolved around our success was dependent upon these key people playing an important and effective role.
Yeah.
And if those key people are the first ones to disengage, well, what happens to the rest of the team?
Yeah.
As
and
well.
It's not to say that, it's going to be easy to merge cultures, but the process we're talking about with the baseline culture audit and working with human story makes it easier, because now we're again seeing where are we aligned and where are we really different. I would love to share another story, because I think sometimes we think about M&A activity only happening with really large firms. And Teresa, I want you to share another story after this with a larger firm. But I want to talk about a smaller firm that was based here in Colorado originally, a destination event management company that was small but mighty company, one of kind of Colorado's top women-owned businesses, very very award winning, was, years before, Colorado was like a popular tourist destination, but the whole idea of destination management was about like, hey, let's bring in big sales incentive trips. Let's bring in business people and let's create these really awesome experiences in all of the different locations that we have in Colorado that people visit. And so
tucked away in the mountains somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And DSC, as the company was known, was, kind of big in Colorado. But the owner of DSC was saying, hey, at some point I've got to retire and I've got to sell this business. What am I building and how do I fit? Right, with a potential acquirer? What could I build that would be of value? And so she made the decision that she needed to grow her footprint outside of just Colorado. She needed to, maybe look at some destination management companies in Wyoming and, Utah and Nevada and et cetera. And so she was looking at, how do I expand into the West? But, for a small business that's got based in Colorado, how do you find those organizations? And even when they're small, she would say one of the biggest challenges we had was integrating the 3 or 4 employees in a remote office, which I think we can all appreciate now, kind of remote working in remote offices.
Feel like you're part of the team.
Yeah, and it was getting a little bit away from her, like her ability to like bring the teams together was getting kind of away from her. And so we had gone through with her that baseline culture audit project that we described, specifically because she was doing some rebranding work as well. But what she found is that by defining her culture, the culture of DSC through story, and specifically this firm landed on hero and sage as 2 archetype patterns that were part of their origin story, that represented the way they worked with clients and customers, their personal commitments to the business.
Yeah. And they tied to the stories that the staff told. Like there was lore, right? We often have this lore that runs through our companies. Some really well-known companies have their stories told publicly, and they're part of a larger cultural lore, but all companies have a lore that really is that red thread that helps to tell the story of who we are, why we connect to one another, what makes us great, right. Where we get stuck. But the stories were fantastic.
Well, and the founder of this firm tapped into story, right? Hero was one of the stories that we mentioned. And there's like an example of a staff person. There were supposed to be fireworks that went off for some big corporate event at the top of the mountain, and the fireworks weren't going off and they weren't coming off. And so there's this story of the staff member running up the hill in high heels, right, to get the fireworks to go off. This is an example of like the hero culture, that we're going to do whatever it takes to, make this experience for our client like nothing they've ever experienced. That was kind of the feeling of that hero. So as this owner went out and purchased smaller destination management companies and built that footprint outside of Colorado, she actually would bring all the employees together every year for a big event where she was trying to integrate new employees into that hero sage culture. Like, what are your stories? How do you connect? How does the work you're doing in Jackson Hole connect with what we're doing here in Denver, Colorado? And together we're telling this story. And she said, it was really interesting. It's like I started by looking at what is the brand, but I ended up being able to have this very tangible way of building a culture that could be infiltrated in all of these remote offices and bringing people together. And it was so successful. She went around and did that for, 7 or 8 years, acquiring different organizations. And so I want to give you some of the results that she was able to accomplish. She expanded into 4 other Western states outside of Colorado. She grew from 4 to 9 offices, from 25 employees to 50 employees, plus 250 regional contractors, 2 times the revenue 2 times plus EBITDA through those consolidations that she was doing, and ultimately sold to a private equity firm, which was her goal, at a very aggressive multiplier. So making that culture a tangible way of merging and bringing in other people had some really outstanding results, even for a firm of 50 people.
Yeah. I love that story. And what she did there is scalable, right? So it's understanding the key components of it and the, key roadblocks that we're trying to solve for when mergers go south. So I'll share an example of an organization that used CultureTalk and the Archetype framework and the baseline culture audit a couple of different times. First time they were focused on, to your point, how does this, represent the way we talk about ourselves? We brought together disparate, in this case, technology companies, and we began to work together, and we wanted to merge the brands just from the polish on the outside. But in doing the work to merge the brands and slicing and dicing and looking at, what is our culture, what came glaringly to the surface was the disconnect between the first 2 merged entities and the challenges that they were having operationally between an office in Texas and an office in the mid-Atlantic. I think it was Baltimore. And so understanding why are we constantly butting heads and uncovering that the operational style and the culture profile of the Texas operation was a lover archetype, very relationship based, driven by our desire to win together, to look for what do we have in common? How can I help you succeed? It's like this, right? Yeah. A lover archetype operates on a one-on-one basis. I'm looking out for your best interests, and I assume you're looking out for mine. They were working with and had acquired a firm that was high sage. And this sage culture sits back and says, what are you suggesting? Hold on. We're going to go research that. We'll get back to you next week. Kind of felt cold, felt very, judgmental, and like you didn't accept us. You weren't interested in our best interests and what worked for us and what was
didn't trust us to have
right to have flag, right? Yeah. Big flag in a lover organization. What? You don't trust me? I take that personally, right? That's a shadow side. So a lot of anxiety happening in Texas over the way they're being treated from the new office and the new kids in Baltimore. Baltimore's going, what are you so upset about? Of course, we need to have logic. We need to have research, and we need to be objective about what we do. And that's the way you succeed. Texas believes we succeed through compromise, consensus building, relationships, very different operational styles. Yeah. So in doing the audit and being able to just really see on the face what was happening was a huge opener for them to begin addressing the challenges in the relationships and the challenges that those were bringing up operationally. And so it's a work in progress where we're able to hear differently. Oh, as a lover, I'm not going to take, or as a lover operation, as a lover culture, let's not take that personally. They need 3 days to get back to us.
Right.
Oh, we'd better accelerate our research. They're getting anxious down there. They need to hear from us, and they feel like we've disconnected. They need a sense of, consensus building. They need to hear this from us. So literally, very quickly, clear steps that can be articulated and operational shifts through hearing and actually understanding what are we experiencing, when these conversations, when these integration efforts are taking place.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a whole lot to begin shifting some of the behaviors and compromising a little bit to see what outcomes we get. And, the ability to save it. And essentially in that case, saved the merger, really saved them from having a failure and put them into a space of being able to consistently work on those things. And that's just one story within this much larger organization.
Yeah, and just, I mean, it brings it all to the surface. Like, what are those things? What are those things? And if we can bring them to the surface so that now we can talk about the motivations, the behaviors, and not the individuals that are pushing our buttons, or that department or that group. But like, how can we successfully together manage these differences? Because it's never like one is all wrong, and it's never like black and white. It's never one is right and one is wrong. There are benefits to both styles of operating, and
there's value to both styles. Absolutely.
And it becomes for an organization that successfully navigates that actually becomes a new opportunity, right? Because we don't have to give up one of our styles or the other styles, but we learn to navigate and to bring in perhaps the best of each.
Right. And then I think if you do that early, as those walls go up, right, as the tendency is still to get your back up, to step back, to feel offended, but you can recognize, oh, wait a minute, my reaction is going to increase the wall going up. And so how can I look this from a different perspective? How can I use the lens of this framework to understand and ask better questions, to help keep the wall down so that communication can keep flowing, and to continue deciding that that's the space that we're going to operate from. We're going to get curious about what's happening over there, and we are going to ask good questions, and we're going to use our growing experiences to say, oh, wait, look, it went well. We can improve the outcomes. We can achieve, to our opening ideas, we can achieve the value, we can exceed the value if we're conscious about the way we bring these cultures together.
And it just is a testament, so many times people think, oh, the culture, that's something that'll work itself out. It's sort of the soft side. This kind of human dynamic that happens is game changing in terms of success, and in terms of the bottom line, and in terms of, the outcomes of a merger. So,
and not to mention, it's game changing in the way that all those human beings feel about this situation. So again, the deal happens way up here. The human beings on the front line are supposed to carry it out and take the brunt of it.
Right.
So how can we be game changing for those human beings, the very human beings and employees and resources that we want to keep and maintain and not lose through the merger? Is because if the numbers reveal themselves the way we're hoping, we'll need more of them. We'll need to have a reputation as a place that people want to come. And so, there are many different potential positive impacts when we think this way.
And back to the roadmap, all three case examples that Teresa and I have shared here today, the organization had done a baseline culture audit prior to merging, and had built brands around a cultural profile, which is what we were talking about last week. Subsequently, that assessment and that profile was not gathering dust. It became an asset that we could use again as we enacted this growth strategy of acquiring firms and bringing them in and doing it successfully. So lots of other opportunities we could talk even in the M&A space, but it's certainly a very impactful way to be using cultural assessments, is to successfully navigate these integrations post-merger.
Yeah. And because they had done those baseline culture audits, everyone at the original company already knew the language. So not only wasn't the assessment gathering dust, it was ready, it was feet on the street, people ready to implement it with these ideas. So they were actively using and engaged in the conversation already. So what a jumpstart on a successful merger.
So if you are in an organization that's going through a merger and wants to think about getting some help with this cultural integration, we do have a number of partners in the CultureTalk network that specialize in M&A and helping cultures do that. As Teresa mentioned at the beginning, we also have a certification class coming up in September where you could learn how to take these assessment tools, run a baseline culture audit, and be the person putting together that cultural integration plan collaboratively with clients or even in your own companies. Love to share more. Thank you for joining us or for catching the replay. Always feel free to reach out to Teresa or I if you'd like some more information and if we can support the things you're working on.
Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much. See you soon.